Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a live discussion of a really great work of science fiction by Ursula K. Le Guin, The Lathe of Heaven. I have that same version, but it's in the other room, so I don't have mine to hold up, but I love the colorful cover of that one. I am joined by two of my fellow cohorts in the Fireside Discord. Matt is under the weather and unable to join us today, unfortunately, so we won't get his insights, but I'm joined by Joanna and Evie. And we're here to just talk about this really, really great work of science fiction. If you're here in the chat, just say hello. I love your contributions to these live streams as well. And we're going to start spoiler free. So if you haven't read this book, we're going to start with just kind of some of our spoiler thoughts. And actually, Joanna's going to start with just kind of a little bit of a synopsis, so that if any of you haven't read it before, maybe give you a little bit of an idea of what it's about, and then we'll give kind of some spoiler-free thoughts and chat about it, and then we'll let you know when we go into spoilers, because there's a lot to unpack in this small book, which is one of my favorite things about great works of science fiction. But let's go ahead and get started. I'll start with you, Joanna. First of all, welcome back to Red Fury Books, and just however you want to start. If you want to start with your thoughts, or you want to start with a synopsis, or take it away.
Sure. Yeah, I wrote out my own little handwritten review of this. It's not very well written, but I thought it'd be a good way to just get us started with what the story's about, because that's something that I feel like I could have done a better job on when we had our blindside discussion. Uh, so first, and also thank you so much, Josh, for hosting, and so excited to talk with you and Evie. And I feel like Evie and I are somewhat matching the book a little bit with our colors here, so that's kind of cool. Yeah.
Hey, actually, my shirt kind of matches
It
too.
does
I just
too, it's
forgot
in
the
the scheme, yeah, that is neat. Okay, so The Lathe of Heaven, it was published in 1971, is set in a time when global warming has long exceeded the point of no return, and overpopulation is congesting civilization. In Seattle, a man named George Orr finds that his dreams change reality. Um, and let's see, meek of character and with a strong aversion to his dream power, he takes medication to further prevent catastrophe. Once caught for his drug violation, he is sent to a psychiatrist, Dr. Haber, and legally bound to undergo treatment. Dr. Haber quickly learns George is telling the truth about his dreams, and Dr. Haber he actually uses hypnosis, is right, if I understand correctly, uses hypnosis or subliminal messaging and a Transcap EEG machine to manipulate George's dreams for good intent. But what if the intent is that the ends justify the means? It's the intention, but what if there is no end? What if we have are means? So that's a quote in the book, by the way. George reaches out to Heather Lalache, a lawyer, to ensure Haber is working to cure him and not use him. Heather ends up becoming somewhat of a love interest in some dream realities and becomes entangled in a mess with the two men who have no control. So George has no control over what he dreams. One of the quotes is, I am living a nightmare from which time to time I wake and sleep. And Dr. Haber has no control over his own ambition. So this is kind of where we're starting at. Is just this exploration of these two men, their relationship with one another, a psychiatrist, and then his patient. So George, it's like the story is about what happens if what you dream can affect reality, but you have no control over what you dream. And then what if you're a psychiatrist and you have some influence over the person who is dreaming? What would you do with that power? And then the story takes off into a multitude of themes. That's all I got for now. I have a lot more, but I don't want to go into too many spoilers.
Okay, so Evie, welcome. And what were your kind of just general thoughts? Spoiler free, of course.
Yeah, this is Bat's replacement, by the way, for good or for ill. But no, so this is I don't even remember the number of Leguin books I've read, but this is one of the better science fiction of her science fiction that I've read. It doesn't quite supersede the Word for World is Forest for me, but it was really, really compelling. This is, as Alan says, capital A, capital S about something. And I loved the way that she was exploring these themes of agency, purpose, destiny, control, and it starts off in this kind of dreamlike, well, literally dreamlike quality to it, and then there's a shift about halfway through that I think might be divisive for some people. Like a split, and without going into spoilers, I can see it throwing people for a loop. But you get into the very much the science fiction, stereotypical science fiction aspects of this book. I did read somewhere that she wrote this book trying to either emulate or like pay homage to Philip K. Dick. To be fair, I haven't read any Philip K. Dick. But if this is anything like that, it's probably going to be a trippy time. So
I've only read one Philip K. Dick book, and it was a trippy time. So
okay, cool.
That's well said. Yeah. Interesting. I'll just say that this was not my favorite Leguin novel, but I still think it was really good, very satisfactory. I don't think Leguin has missed for me yet. I've only read her science fiction so far. But yes, I agree about the dreamy quality. I want to talk about that in a little bit. But Josh, your thoughts?
So it's funny, Evie, you brought up the capital A, capital S about something. And my whole reading experience of this reminded me, it didn't reach the level of one of my favorite science fiction books, which is like this, but the whole experience reminded me of it. And that was Replay by Ken Grimwood. And that's one of those stories that's kind of just about a concept. It's about something, and then the author just has to do it. And I just love the execution of this book. I thought she did such a good job of just keeping me engaged and continually surprised with the directions that things would go. And some of that we can talk about in the spoiler section, because some of the ideas that he would have where he'd try to influence a dream this way and it would have this different outcome, which anyway, there's thoughts of good versus bad, like utopia, dystopia type of thing in there. But I really enjoyed that. And it reminded me of Replay, because Replay was the same thing. It was like just a really cool idea. And then same thing with Lathe of Heaven. As I'm reading, I'm just wondering, okay, how's this thing going to end? And is it going to end satisfactorily? And I think for the most part, it did. It didn't have I thought Replay stuck the landing 100%. It's like a top 10 sci-fi book of all time for me. This, not quite those heights, but I still really, really love this book. I mean, I've always loved Le Guin's writing. This is only my second sci-fi of hers that I've read. And I didn't really love The Left Hand of Darkness, which was the other one of hers that I read. It's been 15 years though, so I don't know if I might like it or appreciate it more now. But when I read it, I didn't love it. But I did enjoy her Earthsea books, and I knew that I just liked her as a writer. I mean, she's got beautiful prose, and even in a science fiction story where a lot of times that kind of writing style just isn't as prevalent in this genre. It still works just kind of beautifully. And it was a great reading experience. I really enjoyed it because, like I said, it's a short book that just kept me engaged because I just didn't know where things are going to go. And I love that when I don't know where a story is going to go.
Oh, that's beautifully said. That's a really good point about the type of narrative it is. And although I haven't read Replay, I could definitely see that parallel that you're talking about. And it's so interesting about the influence of Philip K. Dick. I think I've heard that before. Hey, K-Box. Yeah, so I've heard that influence before, and I think it makes sense just based on the one Philip K. Dick book I've read, which is Ubik. I loved Ubik, by the way. I thought it was a lot of fun, but it does have that type of slight absurdity. Well, I would say it's absurd. It definitely has some absurd humor in it. And with this book, something that I was thinking about a lot when I got to the end is how I feel like there's a lot of heavy weight to the themes she's exploring in this book, that of agency. She ties in some Taoist Buddhist elements that we can talk about. She goes into this whole entire question of what happens if you could play God, and then what happens when man sees himself outside the continuum, sees himself as separate, and fails to recognize our interconnectedness. And I just thought the contrast between Dr. Haber and George Orr was fascinating for me. And although I feel like there was a lot of depth to the themes, uh, I felt like the tone of this book did not feel heavy to me. It did not feel heavy or overly dark, even though if you really take in some of the ideas, there is a heaviness to it, but
And
it
the world
doesn't feel
itself
that
is
way in tone. It didn't feel that way in tone for me.
yeah, I from the get-go, I think I mentioned this in the chapter 1 like thoughts or whatever. I was surprised with how dark this world was that they
Mhm.
set up. It's so bleak. And I'll just add like for the Philip K. Dick, I think it was Mitch from various discords. He said the three stigmata of Palmer Eldritch by Philip K. Dick. That that's probably specifically the one that Ursula Le Guin is kind of riffing off of or responding to, because I had mentioned to him that I see so many parallels between the Lathe of Heaven and Ched Chain's Story of Your Life
Uh-huh.
story. And I feel like George Orr and Louise, I can't remember her last name, the doctor, main character in The Story of Your Life, there's so many parallels, and I feel like Ted Chiang had to have at least read The Lathe of Heaven, if not drawn inspiration from, it sounds like the same three stigmata of Palmer Eldritch and Philip K. Dick in general, because there's so many, again, parallels and just not just of theme, and but also like the characters themselves and the setup and the narrative style. It's just really, really cool, really interesting. A lot of intertextual conversations there.
Yeah, yeah, and there was good humor in this story too. I mean, there were a couple of moments where I chuckled out loud. Uh, and I thought that the character, by the way, there's like we're primarily following 3 characters, I would say, mostly 2, Dr. Haber, the psychiatrist, and then George Orr, the patient who has the dreams that come true. But then there's also a female character, Heather Lalache, I think is how you say her name, the lawyer she starts out as a lawyer
Yeah.
at the beginning, and she does end up being somewhat of a love interest, I would say, in this story, but her character was just made me chuckle so many times in the story. Uh, I even at the beginning when she and George are interacting, there's like a little bit of flirting that occurs, and in her mind, she's like, "What does it say?" She says, "Mr. Or, Mr. Either or something."
Yeah.
It just little things like that that I liked, but yeah, there is, like, a touch of humor, a touch of absurdity, and it also, like Evie said earlier, like, it's the dreamy quality to it because we're dealing with the nature of dreams, and I think because of that, it never felt to me like I was reading this heavy, super dark, nihilistic type of story. "Hey, secret sauce with Storycraft, Whitney." Yeah, so I think it's interesting the way she and I think she does so much in a short page count is worth saying too.
Yeah. That's what I
And I know,
marvel.
Josh,
That's what I marvel.
you finished this in like a day, whereas I took like a
Yeah.
week because I was just again, I guess each reader to their own, but
Yeah.
you breeze through it, and I'm just like, I feel like I have to take these chapters like it wasn't dense writing, but there was just a lot of meat on those pages for me to kind of reflect on and relish and think about. So, but yeah, sorry.
No, it's just I kept wanting to see where it was going. And again, that was another reason why just replay kept popping into my head. The premise of that book is that a man dies and he wakes up in his 18-year-old self in his dorm room in college. And then when he gets to the same age again, he dies again and he's reborn and he keeps replaying his life. And like each permutation is going to be different because he's a different person each time. And here, after each dream, the world is different. And that's what kept me going because I was just fascinated by just the choices that she made about how things had changed. And when sometimes a benevolent thought had darker consequences. And like Joanna, the thing you said about the darkness in this book, I just jotted down a couple notes before we started here of things I was thinking about. And like if you make a bullet point list, like I kind of did on my notepad here, like, yeah, it's like you would think this is a really dark book, But you're right, because of the tone and the way it's written, it never felt like, I never felt like this was a bleak read or anything.
Right.
But when you break it down and you look at some of the component parts, you're like, oh wow, yeah, it really is.
It really is. Absolutely. Especially when we go into spoilers, we could talk about some of the things that occur. That's so interesting, by the way. So, really quickly, I know this is a little bit of a digression, but with replay, is the character a different person every time
No,
he
he wakes up in his own body in his dorm
Okay.
room. Yeah.
Okay.
And
With
it's
memories of his past
yes,
life?
and he
Or
remembers all of it. So like he's 18 years old, but mentally he's like 45.
Oh, I gotta read
The
this
next
book.
time he's 18 years old, but mentally he's like 70 or whatever. And it keeps happening, and he has to keep replaying his life and then try to get out of this loop in some manner. So
Like, isn't there a Groundhog Day movie that kind of has a
yeah, very,
similar
very similar to that.
premise?
But yeah, George R. R. Martin was talking about it on an interview as one of his favorite books one time, and I jotted it down. And yeah, George was right.
I've gotta check this out. That sounds
Yeah,
cool.
it's really good, and it's typical, just like this book. That's what I love about kind of these idea-driven science fiction stories, is that they get so much accomplished in such a short volume,
Yeah.
and I just marvel at that. Like K Fox says here, yeah, without fluff, and it's
Yeah.
true, and I think that's kind of just something that sci-fi authors have a great knack at.
She's very purposeful with her writing.
Yes.
I was gonna say something slightly adjacent is have you ever seen Josh, I don't know if you or Evie would ever remember the show because it's so old, but Quantum Leap
Oh
science
yeah, I
fiction show?
loved Quantum Leap. Yeah,
Gosh, I love that show. And
yeah,
like how he'd wake up like in a new body. He would literally be a different person though every time.
yeah,
And it's something you can't quite escape. Yeah.
yeah.
Just think fascinating premise.
So, are there any more spoiler-free things? Oh, one thing I wanted to bring up is the obvious George Orr name has to be a riff on George Orwell. I mean, it has to be, given some of the themes that happen later in this book.
Why
I mean,
didn't I
would you
think about
agree?
that?
yeah, I didn't think about that until you mentioned it, but that makes sense.
Yeah. Why didn't I think about that? That's so clever. Wow. Interesting. Interesting food for thought.
Yeah, that was one thing that kind of popped up. But yeah,
I think it's safe to say this was a smashing success, especially in comparison.
yes,
I was like, I hope they all like it at least more than the last
By the
book.
way, this was Joanna's pick. Everyone that thought it was
Yeah.
my pick, I'm so sorry. It was Joanna's pick.
I redeemed myself. I think I've redeemed myself with this one.
yeah. The two picks so far, if you don't know, on the Fireside, we anonymously each nominate a book that the Fireside then votes for. And both times Joanna's won. So you're 1-1, because I think we didn't, as a group, didn't like Blindside, but I think we really enjoyed this one. So at least you have the pulse on the zeitgeist of the Fireside so far, at least in the choices. This is one, Matt in this comment here, the first 15 lives of Harry August. That's a book I've wanted to read for a while because I've heard some really good things about that one that's kind of similar. So any more spoiler-free thoughts before we delve into spoilers?
I'm trying to think if there's anything. I think we covered, I've said everything I can spoiler free.
So just generally, so the way this starts off, it's for me poetic, and you can see Leguin's poetry background, which the book is behind me. I'm not gonna bother the cat, but like it really inspired me to start reading her poetry, because that first couple of paragraphs were just beautiful, like lyrically, poetically, like gorgeous. And it kind of, that tone or that style is consistent throughout, but it's not as like heavy as in the beginning, but it really just kind of, for me, just pulled me in to the story and just went from there. But yeah.
I loved your thoughts about that because I saw you wrote that in the Fireside Discord, and that's so neat that that it inspired you to pick up her poetry. I'd never thought about her poetry. I don't even know if I knew she wrote poetry, so now I'm curious. Do
Yep.
you want to read aloud at least a couple of paragraphs just
Yeah.
to give a sense of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So I'll just read well, yeah, I guess the first paragraph. So it's from chapter 1, which, by the way, just as an aside, I really liked the what is it? The epigraphs? Is that what they're called? At
Yes.
the start of each
Mhm.
chapter. But it's current born, wave flung, tugged hugely by the whole might of ocean. The jellyfish drifts in the tidal abyss. The light shines through it, and the dark enters it. Borne, flung, tugged from anywhere to anywhere. For in the deep sea there is no compass but nearer and farther, higher and lower. The jellyfish hangs and sways. Pulses move slight and quick within it, as the vast diurnal pulses beat in the moon-driven sea. Hanging, swaying, pulsing, the most vulnerable and insubstantial creature, it has for its defense the violence and power of the whole ocean, to which it has entrusted its being, its going, and its will.
Wow.
Like, and then it talks about the continents, and like it's just so good. And then just the kind of thematic parallels. I had actually put a note here that for me it page 178 and 179, there's a paragraph on those pages, at least in my edition, that ties back to those first paragraphs.
Oh, wow.
That I think was just, whether it was intentional or not, it
I'm sure
just
it was.
I felt the kind of harkening back.
But it's interesting with the prose, though, because I remember, if you remember when Philip was he did a bunch of top 10s of fantasy authors. And one of the things I remember very clearly is he did one on prose.
Yeah.
And I think he had Leguin as number 1,
Yeah.
or real high up on the list. And it's so true. I mean, she's very, very skilled.
Yeah, I agree. She has a whole book about writing, by the way, Steering the Craft, which is
Oh.
excellent. Highly recommend it. And I think that was something that I deeply appreciated about The Dispossessed, which is my favorite Le Guin novel, is I read that with Alan. And the funny thing about it, the irony of it, is that every time Alan mocked a passage, it would make me like look back at the passage and think, wow, like I would start to realize what she was doing with her prose that I didn't really notice on a first read. With her prose, I feel like she does it. Her craft is so it's so natural and fluid and subtle that it's something that you can overlook. You could easily overlook what she's doing, and then when you look back and then really think about what she's doing, you realize, oh, she's doing things very purposefully and very like there's a lot of intention and there's a lot of dexterity in her prose. She's doing a lot of. I noticed she was changing techniques depending on the tone of the scene or whatever was happening, and I think that the passage that Evie just read is just such a good example of that.
There's complexity without feeling burdensome to her prose
Yes.
in general.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And that's and something Philip is also always saying is how economical she is with her prose. And I think we could
Yeah.
all agree about that, especially with this
Yeah.
book, because my goodness, it's so short. It's 184 pages, but I was so surprised how much it made me think.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Here's another one. Dexterity. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I'm going to put up the spoiler alert banner, and we can start delving into spoilers a little bit. So one of the, I just wrote down, I just jotted down some things, is some of the things about, I mentioned earlier when we were talking about how you'd have a kind of an idea with good intentions would affect negatively. Like one of the first ones that caught to my brain was, there's a overpopulation problem.
Yes.
So we set about dreaming to get rid of this overpopulation, and it's successful because there's a plague and it killed all these people. So it's like you had these great intentions of this very positive thing, and it had this very negative repercussions. And that's one of the things I really liked, is how this continually throughout the book, you had this where it's just these unintended consequences of something with good intentions.
Yes, so well said. What was it? This plague suddenly comes and 6 billion people are just wiped out overnight as a solution to the overpopulation problem. And in order to cure or to perpetuate or to generate world peace, we suddenly have aliens on the moon, which
Mhm.
causes humanity to have a sense of solidarity against the
Yeah.
aliens. Wow. Really interesting the way that we're brought into this world too. So one thing I also want to point out, it's like a little tiny detail, but it was this concept of a trial marriage, how George was in a trial marriage. Did you all pick that up
Yeah.
prior to it beginning? So I guess is that maybe the consequence of overpopulation was
Mhm.
him having to have trial marriages? I don't know how that
Yeah.
worked. But yeah, I agree with you. I feel like the whole entire every time we tried to fix the problem, we just made things worse every single time.
Well, I mean, even before the population problem, or the population issue, um, it starts off minuscule, and you see George's utter grief and despair over. He says, "Who am I? Who am I to meddle with the way things go? And it's my unconscious mind that changes things without any intelligent control." And he's referring to when he initially goes to Dr. Haber and he's talking about how he killed his aunt because she was essentially molesting him. That was what I inferred.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't want this to happen anymore. So he's like, he wants it to stop, but then he killed her. So he's already got this grief. And then when it got to the scene where he solves the population problem, I felt despair for him because I'm like, this man is going to break. Because
Mhm.
if he is already on, razor tips edge for killing his aunt who actually did him a wrong, and then all of a sudden 6 billion people are wiped off the face of the planet just from his dreams, like this man is going to break. And it's that's the heaviness that like got to me and made me had to like sit and really sit with the book, and that's why it took me so long to read this book.
Mm.
Because you are in obviously George's perspective during those chapters, and you feel so deeply for him. And again, to the point that that Leguin uses language, like we're not in his perspective. It's not a first person perspective, but that she's able to convey those feelings to the reader in this third person narrative, I think is telling and obviously effective for me.
Well, and I think even with that too, it's George from that young age is faced with just a great degree of isolation because anytime one of his dreams alters reality, it's that new timeline is what everybody has already lived. So they didn't
Mm.
even know. So like he had still had those experiences of,
Mhm.
what went on with his aunt. But then, I mean, I don't remember, was she just totally had never like lived with them or she had never even been alive or something like that? It was just like was totally written out of the everybody else's story, except he still had those memories. So like anytime the world changes, his world changes because of one of his dreams. He's almost more isolated himself because of it.
Yeah,
Mm.
in a car crash 1,000 miles away 6 weeks ago, I'm responsible for her death.
Yeah.
So
That's right. I totally
Yeah.
forgotten about that, to be honest with you. Like, I had forgotten about that part of the story, because but yeah, there's certainly a lot of trauma there, and the further isolation every single time he has this dream experience, and of course, nobody's gonna believe him, and he's not gonna try to convince anybody. It's almost by accident that the psychiatrist, Dr. Haber, figures it out that it
Yeah, when he happens to be just, I guess, in the room. I don't know if I didn't understand the exact mechanics of that, but it was one of those like almost had to be in the room with the change so that he would also remember the past timeline with the picture changed on the wall or whatever.
Mount Hood. Yeah.
But yeah, the but yeah, I mean, the more I think about it, the more I see that it does kind of have George, that he doesn't have anyone to turn to, because especially when he starts not 100% trusting Haber.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm curious, what did you all think about George's character? Because I mean, in addition to that, because I wondered while I was reading this how people perceived him. Because yes, I would be curious. What did you all think of his character? Because I have some
So
thoughts. I want to hear your
from
thoughts.
from the get-go, the way that George sees himself and the way that he's portrayed against Haber is that George is feminine, weak. He doesn't have any sort of constitution, and Haber like feels like he has to. It's an almost predatory nature that Haber has on George, and he feels that George shouldn't, he also wonders, like, why does this man have this more, I think he actually uses the phrase of like feminine or female disposition or something like that. Maybe Kim can correct me. I know she's in the chat. But there's this just dichotomy or juxtaposition of male, female, weak, strong, control and lack of control really embodied in both George and Dr. Haber. And George's character as initially being perceived as weak and, well, weak-willed, weak-minded, that put me off a little bit. It made me a little concerned, but as you read further, I understood why he was perceived that way, or why he was written that way, and why he was described that way, I should say. And especially as we learn more about Dr. Haber and that juxtaposition of those two characters. If putting myself in George Orr's shoes, I would have broken down. Like, so I get his character. So,
He reminded me of kind of a protagonist in a Murakami book. Murakami always has these protagonists that are very, very passive and just kind of let things happen around them. And that's how I felt like when he got with Haber. Like, he was just letting Haber, at least for quite a while, just letting Haber, take the reins and take the lead. So, I mean, there was the masculine and feminine, like you mentioned there, Evie, but I always almost saw it as a character with just passive versus active kind of actions. And it was almost like he just, he didn't want to go into the therapy, but once he got there, he was just like, I want to be cured of this, but I don't really want to have to do anything. I just want you to fix me. And I felt that, especially as, we got into what that augmenter machine and all of that going on. It was almost like he was like, okay, yeah, I'll just do whatever. And it reminded me of that, which often frustrates me, but I guess because this book wasn't too long, it didn't frustrate me too long. But sometimes in a Murakami book, I just want to like shake the protagonist, say, well, you do something, I never felt that here because it was, I guess, short enough. And then once he got his love interest in the story, I felt like he became a little bit, a character with a little bit more agency than just kind of letting the things happen.
I have some thoughts about that. So I appreciated hearing your thoughts, because that's kind of what that was what I was thinking, is that he's perceived as being this more passive character, this more meek character. The word meek came up for me a lot. And even the way he's physically described at the beginning, I definitely bounce back and forth between feeling bad for him and being frustrated for most of the book. And I was thinking that too. I was like, I can imagine a lot of readers feeling frustrated with this protagonist because he's not assertive. I feel like people get annoyed with characters who are not fighters. That's been my sense. But I think that Leguin, this is my theory. My theory behind George being the way he is, you also get a sense too, there are layers here. There are a lot of layers to George, but you also get a sense right from the beginning, he's defending Manny, his I guess his landlord for the pharmaceutical card. He's like, "No, nobody gave it to me." And he's like, Manny basically, I think turned I want to say, I don't know if my memory is failing me, but I feel like Manny was like, "No, I did. I gave him my drug card." He's trying to like take it all on himself. He doesn't want to get anybody in trouble. And I'm like, gosh, George already seems like a caring person. Like he would willingly self-sacrifice himself just to make sure he's not causing harm to others. It seems like that's the number one thing about him is just, I do not want to cause harm to others. I will even take drugs illegally to prevent myself from dreaming because I don't want to cause a harm. And I think my theory behind it is that I think Leguin is playing with the idea of a bodhisattva. Now, if Matt were here, he might fight me about this and like the way that I understand what that term means. But the way I was taught what that term means, and I know Matt has a different understanding, and you should probably trust Matt because he's Buddhist. But my understanding of what this means is that somebody who is willing to forego and like a Buddhist who is willing to forego enlightenment and nirvana in order to stay in this karmic wheel in this life in order to help others to achieve nirvana. That basically I'm not going to go on to nirvana while you, my friend, are suffering. I'm going to be here to help you out. And I kind of see him as that kind of character. And I think it's signaled in the prose because there's a passage in which Heather is describing him, I think even just internally in her own thoughts. And yeah, there's a moment when Heather considered George and his kindness, and she asked um, if there could exist people who recognize evil and resist evil and yet are utterly unaffected by it. And like this is a phenomenon to her at first. She's like, wow, there's somebody who can actually recognize evil. Like it's not that he doesn't see evil. He recognizes it, but he's willing to resist it and not be affected by it. And then she answers her own question with yes. Those, and then she says those, as though there are many, by the way, not just George. George is representative of like an everyday man, but he's one of many people around the world that goes unnoticed who is like this, who's like this bodhisattva character. Those who have returned in pure compassion to the wheel. So in a way, she sees him as choosing this. And when she says the wheel, although Leguin never explicitly says this, my immediate thought from my Buddhist knowledge is the wheel of samsara. And so the wheel of samsara is the cycle of karma, the cycle that keeps us trapped in this illusion that it keeps us either grasping for things, grasping at a desire, or aversion, always grasping and aversion. And although George is not perfect, and I feel like there are lessons he's learning in this story, and I specifically think Haber is there as his lesson, I think he's closer to the center of that wheel than most people. He's closer to not wanting to grasp or grasping an aversion than most people. He's more centered in a lot of ways. But because of that, he's not that lack of grasping, that lack of ambition, and that lack of aversion. I mean, he has some, but not quite as much as Haber. He's seen as more weak in contrast, but I feel like I still feel like that's what he's representing in the narrative. And maybe the dream, him continuing to dream and be there is almost like there's almost like a subconscious choice there too, perhaps, even though there's so much lack of agency that's explored in the story as well. But that's my theory about him. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that George also like to as a tangential point to that. I think he also is really he's the everyman. He's also like the well, he literally is the crux of where things change. He's the one that is causing change with his dreams. But simultaneously, he is both things at once, like or the like narrative says or was where he had been for months alone, knowing he was insane and knowing he was not insane simultaneously and intensely. It was enough to drive him insane. And when I read that line, I'm like, that hit me like a ton of bricks of what does that do to the psyche of both knowing you are insane, but also knowing you're not insane, and both of those things being true at the same time.
Yeah, that's well said. I love that quote. I love
I
that
also
quote.
wonder, Joanna, you mentioned at the beginning, you saw some Taoist thoughts in this book, and I know that she, in the epigraphs, a couple times quoted the Tao Te Ching,
Hmm.
and I just wonder because I'm not as well read in that, and just knowing all that, a lot of Eastern philosophy, because it's been so long for me since I've read any of that. I wonder how much of that is really embedded in here, and whether that was just a very, just a very, I'm sure it was very conscious for her to try to incorporate that into the story. And I just wonder how much of it I might have personally missed just because I'm not as well versed in that.
I meant to go back and reflect further because there was a point, and this is the problem when I don't write things down, because I did go through a trail of thoughts at one point, and then I meant to go back and revisit it, and I didn't, about what is meant by the lathe of heaven. And there is an epigraph that explains the lathe of heaven. So I'll read the quote aloud, and then I'd love to hear from you too what you think that this is alluding to, and anybody in the chat too, if anybody wants to join in. Those whom heaven those whom heaven helps, we call the sons of heaven. They do not learn this by learning. They do not work it by working. They do not reason it by using reason. To let understanding stop at what cannot be understood is a high attainment. Those who cannot do it will be destroyed on the lathe of heaven. That's the opening of chapter 3, by the way.
Yeah, there's almost a duality there that kind of can be compared to Orr's character as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Was that so that was the epigraph? Was that from Tao Te Ching or was that from something else?
Zhuang Tse. I don't
Okay.
know. I'm sure that's Tao Te
One.
Ching,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
Right.
And honestly, I've not read the Tao Te Ching, so I'm not sure exactly what that's alluding to. But yeah, it's number 13, according to this. Verse 13, I suppose. They do
23.
not.
23.
Oh, 23. You're right. You're right. There's an extra X there.
I think for me, I also have not read the Tao Te Ching. I actually have Leguin's translation of it, which is apparently not that great. But
I've heard
also
that too.
used translation of it.
Yeah.
So I meant to read it after I read this book, and obviously that never happened. But it kind of is a indication of where George Orr is at. Like, he just wants to stop where he's at. He just wants to stop causing reality changes with his dreams. He just wants to stop. But he needs to have that higher attainment. So if he stops, he will be destroyed by the lathe of heaven, which is, I think, in my mind, that would be Haber, someone else controlling him.
Mhm.
So either you stop and be destroyed, or you continue and hopefully attain, enlightenment, understanding, whatever you want to call that.
It is kind of mysterious to me. I don't know that I totally understand what this is, but I agree with you. I think you're onto something. I think that there is connection to Haber. That's where my mind goes to. There's a connection to Haber, and maybe even just Haber himself. Like, that seems to, because yeah, Haber is the one who's constantly using the machine, constantly trying to change things, and then there's also, by the way, a term. Okay, I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we have aliens that show up.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, the aliens. Because at one point, Heather tries to help George too. She uses hypnosis to try to influence his dreams, and it works. But her suggestion is that take those darn aliens off the moon, and sure enough, they end up
Oh yeah,
on
they
Earth.
invade.
That was wild. And that Haber, oh, that was interesting. She also wanted Haber to be like
Benevolent.
benevolent.
Yeah.
Yes. And Haber's version of being benevolent was to be more of who he was
Yeah.
to be like more ambitious in a way. And
Yeah.
also there were some interesting descriptions of Haber in this story. Do you notice like more than once he's described as this onion where you keep pulling back the layers and there's almost like nothing there?
Yep.
really fascinating. So it's, I mean, there are a few different ways we could look at that. And like one, it's like this is George's dream. Everything we're reading is George's dream in a way, right?
Mhm.
So is he just maybe like a dream figure? And then the other thing that comes to mind is how the alien uses that word that's not really translatable, that has something to do with communication
It wasn't
and
the
dreaming.
air parahine. Was that
I
that
don't
wasn't it?
remember how to say it.
Yeah.
I'll probably butcher a
Oh,
pronunciation.
it was the Iaclu? Iaclu?
Yes. What
Yeah.
was that? What did that mean? I don't think I understood what that meant.
It's untranslatable. You've decided it means dream, eh? And then I don't know what it means. I don't pretend to have any knowledge you haven't got, but I do think that before you go on, blah 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 blah. Yeah, I don't think it's ever explained.
Yeah, well, it's brought up a couple of times. It's like the untranslatable term. Yeah, that's what I wrote in my notes. That may have to do with dreaming, but seems to have to do more with listening. And I don't know. I just wondered if there was a connection there too. But I think there are some things here that I'm not totally sure about.
Well, and
It was
I think the further you got into the book too, that's how it became because we got so much further removed from what would be a more recognizable reality from our
Mm.
perspective. You know, because at one point, like he gets rid of racism, so now everybody's
Oh
gray.
my gosh, yes.
You remember that scene? And I was like, okay, this is and he sees Heather and like she looks very different, and then he just has to like think that it's still her. And um, wasn't there a scene where they try to get rid of cancer and it just turns into um less cancers with euthanasia or something? I'm
Yeah, like
Yeah, something
they
like
they
like that
get
that.
rid of
too.
cancer by making it like there's public what do they call it? Citizens euthanasia or something
Yes,
like that.
yes.
So like people can just like, oh, this guy was being held at his home and he was dying of cancer, just gonna shoot him with euthanasia and on the street. Or euthanize him on the street. But
But it felt like for me, the last half of the book in particular, as we kept drifting further away from a more recognizable reality, it was just one of those like, oh, okay, here's where we're going. You know,
yeah.
like like the first big sci-fi crazy moment was the aliens appearing on the moon. But that's how world peace came about, you know, and then they end up on the planet in one of the next permutations. And then by the very end, of course, it was just so far flung. And it's one of those like, you know, like George should have just kept taking his drugs and skipped the
Oh, yeah.
psychiatry, you know?
It was wild because it's like, oh, but then it turns out that the aliens are peaceful after all.
Yeah, yeah.
And Haber's the one who, I guess, because of his benevolence and everything, he's the one who's able to explain this to the government, and they listen to him. And it's it's so far flung at that point, right?
Yeah, and I
Um,
think at that point, obviously with the aliens and but then them coming down and being benevolent, that was the strongest link for me between the Lathe of Heaven and the Story of Your Life.
oh,
So
Mm.
the ACLU terminology, whatever that was, whatever it meant, it had an equivalency for me in my mind to the language that, spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't read The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, it's fantastic even if you know the point of it. It was the equivalency of the language that the aliens were teaching to the humans. And again, with the parallels between George Orr and Louise in that story, George Orr is, as far as we know, the only one that has this ability to alter reality. Whereas in The Story of Your Life, people start having this ability. Like as long as they learn it, if they learn this language, sorry if you hear my dog barking, they learn this language fluently, they will be able to see their entire lives, and be able to make those make decisions accordingly, which harkens back to the Lathe of Heaven in that George Orr asks Dr. Haber, did you ever happen to think that there might be other people who dream the way that I do, that reality is being changed out from under us, replaced, renewed all the time, only we don't know it? Only the dreamer knows it, and those who know his dream. If that's true, I guess we're lucky not knowing it. And that, I was just like, oh my God. Oh my
That
God.
freaked me out too. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that could imply that, like, maybe there are other people that do this reality, like dreaming. But
I also wonder if that was signpost for like later on in the story when Haber actually finds he does have that power after all. And his dream ends up causing some kind of like apocalyptic version of reality. Y'all know what I'm talking about?
did he? I thought he just literally went insane.
He did. But didn't he wasn't able to use that machine in order to have some sort of effect on himself? I don't know. Maybe I misread it.
I don't remember that.
Outgrew them.
I could be misreading it, but it's like the part where. So remember when George Orr. Okay, let's say. Okay, let me put it this way. Because maybe I'm just explaining this wrong and misunderstood this, but there's a part when George Orr and Lalache, remember they're trying to meet at this restaurant, and then suddenly he's like, I gotta get back to the office because Dr. Haber is gonna use the machine.
Yeah.
So I guess that was what I assumed, is that Dr. Haber was able to somehow figure out how to affect reality with his dreams. But was I wrong about that? Like, did that not happen?
I thought that maybe I misread it. I thought
No,
George
I probably misread it. I do misread things
basically
sometimes.
dreamed again, essentially. And because Heather wasn't there with him, she got like
She was
removed
gone from the
reality.
story. Yeah. Or at least gone from the story is how I
Yeah.
read it.
Well, she was definitely non-existent in some versions of the dreams. Yeah. Which was kind of the part of the tragedy too. Is because
Mhm.
I mean, at the end, George just goes on dreaming and dreaming. And then some versions he just has to meet her all over again. And then some versions of the dream she doesn't exist at all.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's also felt very Buddhist to me. It's like this like letting go of attachment.
Mm.
Mhm.
But I don't know. Maybe I just am misremembering or misunderstanding that part of the end. But
I mean, that furthers the dreamlike quality of this book. That we're like, we read and interpret different things.
yeah, no, I don't know. It did get really wild at that point. So,
Well, and towards the end, I mean, had he lost all his memories at that point? I mean, is that how you kind of perceived
oh,
the very
yeah.
end? Because you're right, it got well, they say I've seen the word trippy with Philip K. Dick, a lot of
Yes.
his books, and that's how I kind of felt towards the end here. Although I need to read him, but yeah, because as the further we got into this, I mean, the end of it was just wild.
Yeah, that I'm looking back at these last few pages and I'm like, this is so weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they called it The Break, capital T, capital B. And I took that as like when I feel like he remembered everything, but
Yeah.
he lost the ability, or he broke the ability to alter reality with his dreams. Like he could
that's
actually
interesting.
okay.
Yeah. Could
That was
be.
my interpretation.
Could be.
Kim says the end is very Philip K. Dick.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, those last few pages are just
Trippy.
they really are.
Well, and it kept kind of accelerating to that. You know,
Yeah.
'cause it was, I mean, I wouldn't say it was slow pace at the beginning, but it wasn't like reality wasn't changing as quickly as it just happened to do in the last third of that, where it just everything just kept changing, and the changes were so big and so vast as compared to the beginning, where it was just, like the first time, like the car accident. Yeah, that's big for George, but it's not big for the rest of the world. And then, it started to accelerate and become more pronounced throughout. So then by the end, it was just very wild.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad. I thought at the end seemed kinda sad to me in a way. I
I
don't know. Or
I
did you all
don't
think
think
it was more positive?
I don't think it was necessarily sad, at least in my perception of it. Um, it was just, I guess, well, it was cyclical because, like, the one of the last things that is said, or the last lines of dialogue, the alien says, "There is time. There are returns. To go is to return." And then, like I mentioned before, like there was a paragraph towards the end that harkened back to those first couple of paragraphs,
Oh, yeah.
where Orr lays back. He had clearly sensed the pity and the protective compassion of the alien standing across the dark room. It saw him not with eyes as short-lived, fleshly, armorless, a strange creature, infinitely vulnerable, adrift in the gulfs of the possible, something that needed help. He didn't mind. He did need help. Weariness took him over, picked him up like a current of the sea into which he was sinking slowly. Air Perahine, he muttered, surrendering to sleep. Air Perahine, replied the alien, soundlessly. Or slept, he dreamed there was no rub. His dreams, like waves of the deep sea far from any shore, came and went, rose and fell, profound and harmless, breaking nowhere, changing nothing. They danced the dance among all the other waves in the sea of being. Through his sleep, the great green sea turtles dived, swimming with heavy, inexhaustible grace through the depths in their element, which, again, harkens back to that first paragraph where they go into, after talking about the ocean and the jellyfish, like talking about the earth and a creature being sea drift. And I was like, this is just, I love cyclical stories, like
Yes.
the harkening back to a beginning. It's just, I love
I
that.
did notice that too, actually, when I read it. I did notice that cyclical nature there.
It's kind of like a hero's journey, which I really appreciate. So,
This is a
K-Fox,
great
thanks.
one. Yeah.
I think I've interpreted parts differently every time I've read it. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see it again in the chat, but so.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yeah, I feel like you could draw different interpretations from this book for sure.
I feel most like big idea type books, that's very true. When you can go in and just look at all the different layers. Because even, I mean, this was just our first time, and it seems like the ending, like my thoughts are a little different. And just hearing you read that, I'm like, oh, okay, no, I didn't think of it that way. So, I mean, I think that's the beauty of the big idea books.
Yeah.
Is that the more you delve in, kind of the more depth or just even different ideas you may bring into it too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I didn't consider what you were saying, Evie, about the break too. That's kind of like that's interesting.
was she from Portland? Is that why she chose Portland, Oregon as the
Was she? Yeah, I
center
think
of the
maybe she
universe?
was.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I don't know anything about her. Like,
I know she was from the Pacific Northwest for sure.
Okay.
What did you, by the way, okay, one more thing. What did you all think about a little help from my friends section?
Yeah.
That was interesting. It felt like that was like some sort of, I don't know. It was an interesting choice.
It felt a little like this is for me type situation. Like, I'm adding this for solely me.
Yeah, maybe that was what it was. I did feel like there was, it's funny because like that type of music and that type of messaging of that time, it's like the let it be, that song, Let It Be. I kind of feel like that was a message of this book in some ways too, like let it be. because
when was this written?
in 1970, I
Okay.
said one. Was that what it was?
So coming out of the tumultuous 60s.
Yeah, 1971.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
But
did give
music
me that
was such a
vibe a little bit because, and maybe also the cover kind of gives me that vibe too. But but
true.
I do
I
get
mean,
that.
music was such a part of culture and
Yeah,
counterculture at the time. I mean, you mentioned on your other video that you posted yesterday with the where what Silverberg said the 60s was really 66 to 73 or whatever,
mhm.
culturally and all those changes. But um, yeah, I'm sure that certainly plays into it.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of some of Le Guin's books do feel very new wave to me. I feel that way even with the Left Hand of Darkness feels that way to me too. But yeah, the let it be kind of idea comes up into my thoughts because I don't know. This is my interpretation. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I feel like that was part of George's lesson with Haber. I don't know. It's kind of confusing, to be honest. I'm kind of conflicted what I think about this because, on the one hand, I was thinking part of him was almost having to open to Haber being who he is. Like the idea of changing Haber, make him benevolent. Like I almost felt like, yeah, you can't change Haber any more than you're trying to change the world. Like you have to accept him being who he is in a way. But at the same time, I
He
think there
wasn't the one
is
that wanted to change Haber, though. It was Heather that wanted to change Haber.
Yeah, that was her idea, wasn't it?
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
So he was
But then
still, I would
during,
argue, he was still being, in that using song equivalencies. He's still he wanted to let it be.
Yeah,
But
that's true. That's true. I think he was struggle he wanted to stop Haber, but I think that's fair. He wanted to stop Haber from doing any harm. He's like, I don't want to be used. He didn't want to be used was his
Mhm.
big thing.
yeah,
Like I want to be I want help, but I don't want to be used or
there was
exploited.
he literally said, like, I want to be cured. I don't want to be used.
That's what it was. Yes. I want to
Yeah.
be cured. I don't want to be used. That's right.
So,
Interesting.
well, that goes into the whole, like, ideas that Le Guin is exploring about agency. Like, if you
Mhm.
don't have agency of your own life, someone's gonna take that agency from you and use it for either their own gain or, you know, debatable gain of other of the world. But
But at the
did
same
either
time,
of
I would
you?
say that Haber didn't have agency either. I feel like that was part of his nature was ambition. Like that was the one thing they could never change about him or could never change about him too.
And you could argue to your point earlier, Joanna, is like that George's his personality is his empathy and his want to protect everyone else. That
Mhm.
never changed.
That's true.
That's never changed. So
That's a
did
good
either of
point.
you read the introduction by Kelly Link?
I meant to, and then I didn't.
Okay,
I
Yeah.
good enough
usually
feeling.
Yeah, I usually don't. Well, I could go read it now. I usually don't because I found so many times I've had things spoiled, when it's an introduction of a book that had already been published or whatever.
Yeah, I always worry about spoiling myself, and then I
Yeah.
also worry about, borrowing too much of from their thoughts and, and that interfering with my own analysis when I'm, like, trying to sort out my thoughts, you know what I mean? So, like, when I'm trying to do my own review and reflection. But that said, I mean, I am gonna read it for sure. Did you read it, Evie? What did you think?
I did not. No,
Oh,
this is my I also don't read introductions because I've been burned one too many times
Yeah.
of
yeah.
being spoiled by stuff. And I always tell myself, "Oh, I'll read the introduction after I'm done with the book," and I always forget. So I have not read it. But
Yeah, that might be interesting to do now.
yeah.
I'm gonna read this one paragraph that I just flipped to just to see what you all think because I think it's interesting right here. Uh, this is, by the way, on page 8, I guess. No, 13. Sorry, I can't read Roman numerals for some reason. So introduction, so first paragraph down says, or is much like the changeable mural on the wall of Haber's office, a dormant volcano a horse that is ridden by Haber, as in folk tales. Witches ride the anxious dreamer. In fact, the Lathe of Heaven opens with 3 noteworthy descriptions of the natural world. There is a jellyfish, a dandelion, and Mount Hood. As as this is a novel in which psychology is featured prominently, it seems permissible to look at what these might signify. A jellyfish, of course, might represent either passivity or a threat. A dandelion growing up from concrete is a symbol of frailty, but also of persistence. Interesting, because I did feel like if one thing we could be said too about George, I did feel like he was quite resilient. Okay. And Mount Hood, looming on the office wall, is a representation of permanence and also volatility. Like George Orr, who reads to other characters as a feminine man, like Evie said, oh, nice job, Evie. They are markers of balance in which opposites are contained.
I mean, that goes back to the being simultaneously like knowing you're insane, but knowing you're also not insane.
Holding
And
those
those
dualities
simultaneously
together.
being true.
Yeah. Fascinating. It also makes me right away think of the Left Hand of Darkness too, with those dualities in mind.
Yeah.
And also the word for world is forest also deals with the nature of dreams and the importance of dreams. Really interesting. I feel like, yeah, I feel like there's definitely thematic threads in all of Leguin's books, as far as I could tell so far. Yeah.
I do like Kim's message, potentially the message that if you don't have someone to protect and value, it's easier to take your agency away.
Oh, wow.
Which, I mean, goes to the point I think,
That's
Josh, you were
true.
making earlier of when George finds Heather in his life, he starts to have more agency.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So
I really appreciated too those passages about Heather. Heather was an interesting character overall. Like I said, I kind of liked her. I liked her quirkiness, but also interesting about how he learns about her past, like her parents, and how I guess her mother was a hippie, like a white hippie, and drawn to her father, who was a black man. And then when Haber gets rid of racism, um, gets rid of by getting rid of race altogether. It's
Yeah.
like, but then how can Heather exist? Because this is so much who she is. Really interesting how that's brought into to her identity. And yet he does find her, which is interesting.
Yeah.
There's like this idea of like no one lives in a vacuum idea. Like we're all just the interconnectedness of everything is so explored.
So I guess,
and at the same time, I'm going to contradict myself really quickly.
okay,
So like nothing lives in a vacuum. So everything is interconnected. And yet something that was interesting, I mean, I guess we could argue opposite of this at the end of the book, maybe, but it seemed like every time he had a dream, there were certain things that were still the same. Like he said, this was still the same, that was still the same. So I thought that was interesting. There were certain aspects of the continuum that were constantly continuous while other things changed.
Someone made I can't remember where I saw it. Maybe someone posted it on Fireside, or maybe I saw it on Reddit or something, but someone had posted a graphic of the timelines for all the dreams.
Oh,
which I thought was
interesting.
pretty cool.
That's neat.
I missed that. I
Oh,
apologize
it's
if I
gotta
missed
be it's
that.
gotta be crazy.
Yeah.
Because I mean, so many things happen and interesting. I'll have to look for that.
Yeah.
Or you can post it in Fireside.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will.
It's so interesting because while Evie's looking for that, Philip had a discussion with Eric. I cannot remember Eric's last name. I feel so bad. A psychiatrist who has a booktube channel and who's a writer, a fantasy writer.
Goodwin? Eric Goodwin?
I don't know his last. I
Yeah.
can't remember. But they had a wonderful discussion on Philip's channel, and they were talking about myth and dream and fantasy and psychiatry and hypnosis. And I was like, oh my gosh, you all need to read The Lathe of Heaven. It felt like
Absolutely.
so on brand for their whole entire discussion.
All of those things.
The only exception, though, is that I think that I want to say his name is Eric, the guest was saying that science fiction deals with what is plausible. And I'm like, in this book, I mean, we don't really deal with what's plausible, except maybe
Yeah.
overpopulation and global warming. I guess you could say those things in the
And
backdrop.
Yeah, it starts
racism.
off with plausible, and then it has the idea that just changes everything. But I mean, even like you said, Joanna, on your video that
The
posted
science fiction.
yesterday about
Yeah.
how telepathy used to be part of science fiction, and that's not really a thing anymore. That's more something that you might see in a fantasy novel than science fiction. So yeah, the thoughts of all of these things do change over time for sure.
They do. Yeah, it's interesting about the telepathy thing because I've heard a few science fiction friends recently be like, "Oh yeah, that's not really science." I mean, they thought that was
Yeah.
more of like a plausible thing back, I guess, in the 60s and
Mhm.
70s. And nowadays we don't think of that as much. That's not as acceptable as a science fiction idea. And at the same time, I'm like, but they are doing research in order to like translate our brainwaves
Mhm.
into I don't know. We might be going there. But yeah. It does make me think about that. And again, I think this could be, I don't know. I mean, like Silverberg said in that discussion, a lot of those authors at that time, even if they didn't associate with being new wave authors, they were still taking advantage of like the freedom in uh in the landscape at the time, the way that there were a lot more experimental ideas flowing. It's like,
Mm.
okay, I'm going to be experimental in my storytelling. So I don't know that I don't know really if Le Guin considered herself a new wave writer, but she was probably influenced by that openness to experimentation and to going more in depth and doing different things. And clearly she was so skilled and so knowledgeable too.
Yeah.
I mean, to your point, Joanna, when you're talking about like being in a vacuum and also not being in a vacuum, like we as people, regardless of whether we're creative or not, like we are doing something in isolation, but we are simultaneous. I guess going back to the simultaneously insane and not insane, and those both being true, like we can work on something or do something in isolation while simultaneously being consciously or unconsciously impacted or being influenced by the culture around us. So to your point, regardless of whether Leguin thought she was a new wave author, like she was writing in that time, so that seeps into her writing. And I mean, if you've read the Earthsea books, you can see the decades that those books were published over, like how the subtleties of life and culture around her, going from what the someone correct me, that what the 60s was, the late
60s to
60s was the
yeah.
first book,
Yeah.
to the 90s or even early 2000s of the last book. How society, I mean, there's grains of consistency throughout, but culture has an impact on everyone,
Yes.
whether intentionally or not.
For sure. And actually one of the points that Silverberg makes in that video that I had, he makes the point that science fiction reflects the culture at the time too.
Mm-hmm.
So she was reflecting certain things. So there's kind of like a meta element there in a way if you think about it. But
I think that's true of all science fiction. I mean, I think back to one of Bridger's recent videos where you talk about apocalyptic fiction and how the different sources of the apocalypse have changed throughout, the last century or whatever. And, like nuclear apocalypse is a big one, but nowadays you get more environmental, and there's just a lot of different subgenres within the genre that are reflective of what things are going on in society at the time. So, yeah, I think that's one of the coolest parts of science fiction, is because it is always a reflective lens of what's going on, today. And they will often take just ideas of society and just put them in the far future, but they're really making social commentaries about today or whatever it may be. So I think that's one of the joys of reading science fiction is just seeing a lot of human and personal elements of what's happening in society, just seeing it portrayed in a different way that you can, look at it from a different lens because it's from a science fiction story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is my shameless plug for anyone that wants to read like science fiction that's being written in contemporary times. Adrian Tchaikovsky's Dogs of War series, like 3 books, like perfect example of what we're talking about, where thematically it is so much a response to what is going on in the past 5, 6, 7 years, and to today. So I am interested to see when I reread them in 5, 10 years time, over time, how that's going to work in my brain. So
Yeah, that's so interesting how it's reflective and predictive at the same time. Yeah. I'll have to check that out, Evie. I know that there's that, and then even though it's more, I think ogres fantasy or science fiction?
without going into spoilers, both.
Oh, okay, cool. Nice.
Well, final thoughts. Maybe what kind of reader would enjoy the Lathe of Heaven?
I think someone who is really in it for the ideas. Like, you can't really be in it for as great as a character as George Orr is, and as complex as the dynamic between him and Dr. Haber and Heather Lalache are. It's really not a character study of in the modern sense. It really is about the ideas of agency and control, and reality. Yeah, exactly. Not Alan. That's basically what I was trying to say. If you're not Alan,
you probably like it.
I've seen literary fiction channels read this book and appreciate it too. So I think that the complexity of ideas might appeal to people who like complex ideas, I guess, or complex literature. There's a lot of, as we mentioned already, and as Evie brought up with those opening paragraphs, and I mean, there's a lot of symbolism in this story. There's a lot of symbolism. There's a lot of metaphor, I would say, and subtext. So this is something that if you really want to dig deep, this is a good book to read, especially for a short page count. And I agree. I think that the characters don't quite have the same. There's a certain quirkiness to the characters, I would say, and they don't quite have the same dimension as you would expect of a modern novel, but there's still a lot to unpack and there's still a lot to appreciate about it. I do think you're right though. I mean, this is not an Allen book. It's I don't know. Thoughts, Josh? I'm struggling on who to recommend this to.
No, I think you can. I wouldn't. I mean, I don't think there are any universal recommendations, but if you generally like science fiction that is about ideas more than anything else, because this is really about the germ of one small idea, and then I think she just executes it really, really well.
Yes.
And my favorite thing was just the journey of this, how the best intentions had sometimes the most negative unintended consequences. And for me, that's what I enjoyed so much about this, because every time, through the dreams, George would try to control something and to make things better, the consequences were never what he intended. So for me, that's what I enjoyed most. I enjoyed just seeing how the story kept changing throughout, and it did get trippy towards the end, but for the most part, I think readers that like books that just take a central idea and just really delve into the consequences of said idea, I think those are the kind of readers that would probably like the Lathe of Heaven.
I agree with that. And I do love what you said too about the execution, because I think one of my biggest pet peeves is when people say, yeah, but science fiction's about ideas. I'm like, you can have ideas and really good
Yeah,
ideas, but
you still got to write it well.
really you still have to have good storytelling and good
Yeah.
execution. And I really do think she delivers, even though the focus is not as character focused, I think, as some people might want. As I'm specifically thinking of modern fantasy readers, and I feel like a lot of modern fantasy readers bounce off Le Guin's science fiction. I feel sad to say that, but I do think that's the case. But I do think like like you said, there's just such great execution and exploring the causal effects of things, the karmic cycle of things, and the dreamy nature is beautifully executed in the story as well.
Agreed. Well, thank you both. Thank you all of you that have been in the chat hanging out, whether you've been giving us food for thought here or just hanging out. We appreciate you being here. And if you're on Team Replay, let us know in the comments section below if you enjoyed the Lathe of Heaven. Obviously, we did. This was the Fireside Books Book Club read for the fourth quarter of the year. So we'll be doing another one in January. So just stay tuned from that. I'm sure we'll all announce it on our channels. And we'll have another chat, end of January, beginning of February, whatever we choose this time around. We'll see if it's another science fiction. That's 2 in a row we did sci-fi. So
we'll see if it's another Joanna pick.
Yeah, we'll see if it's Joanna again. And if you want to vote, come hang out on that Fireside Discord, because we will put up a poll probably like first week of December-ish, and you can choose what we read and discuss next time. But thank you both for hanging out this afternoon. Thank you, chat. And everybody have a great rest of your Saturday.
Bye.